I'm announcing the launch of Alto, the largest infrastructure project in Canadian history. A high-speed rail network between Quebec City and Toronto with stops in Trois-Rivières, Laval, Montreal, Ottawa, and Peterborough. It'll span 1,000 kilometers with 100% electric trains that will reach speeds of 300 kilometers an hour. A reliable, efficient, high-speed rail network will be a game changer for Canadians.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau there in Montreal announcing plans for high-speed rail for the corridor from Toronto to Quebec City, which will be called Alto, covering about 1,000 kilometers, aiming to connect some of this country's biggest cities, including Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. The project will be co-designed, built, financed, and operated by a consortium of companies under the name Cadence. Starting this year, the feds have committed $3.9 billion over 6 years for co-development of the project. That's on top of $371.8 million announced in the 2024 budget. The government says the new line will slash travel times in half, meaning you could get from Montreal to Toronto in 3 hours. Anita Anand is Canada's Transport Minister. She's live with us right now. Hi, Minister. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Great to be here with you, Vashi.
I have a lot to ask you about that high-speed rail, but I have to start on the big story of the week, which is, of course, the crash at Pearson Airport 2 days ago. And I just wondered if you could update Canadians on the latest information you have about where that investigation is at.
Most definitely. The investigation is continuing. But I would first like to thank the crew and the firefighters and the first responders and everybody at Pearson who cooperated during a very, very trying time. And it really showed what crisis management can be at its best here in Canada at Pearson Airport. So my thanks and my gratitude go to all involved. In terms of the update, the TSB officials are working diligently on the investigation, and they've been joined by their U.S. counterparts from the FAA and the NTSB. I've spoken with my counterpart, Secretary Sean Duffy. We're working together to ensure that our officials are both involved in the investigation. I have appointed a ministerial observer who is not participating in the investigation per se, but who is reporting directly to me as the information becomes available. 3 out of the 5 runways have reopened at Pearson. The investigation is ongoing, and when the investigators determine that it is appropriate, the aircraft will be moved to a hangar.
Why did you appoint a ministerial representative? Why did you feel that was necessary in this instance?
It's best practice to do that. We've done that in previous instances, and we want to make sure, I want to make sure that information flows to me as necessary. But once again, this individual plays no part in the investigation itself. That investigation is carried out independently of my office and of the political realm, and we need to let the investigators do their important work, and I want to thank them for the diligence that they're exhibiting at this time.
Has there been anything conveyed to you about a potential duration for that investigation? And I ask because I think there's a huge amount of interest among Canadians after watching, so much of that video. I'm sure you share in that interest. And then also we found out today that there is the black box, that they do have that recording available to them. We know that the crew is all available and willing to be interviewed, at least from the information that Delta shared. And you pointed to the wreckage. That wreckage does still exist for them to be able to utilize in their investigation. Do you have any concept of when we might get some indication of what happened?
The investigation has literally just commenced. And so we need to allow that investigation to take its course. The investigation will occur on site, on the runway, and when the investigators determine that it is appropriate, that wreckage will be moved to a hangar. But again, that has to be on the timeline that the investigators themselves determine. We need to take the time necessary to get this right, Vashi, and the investigation thus far, I would say, is proceeding well.
Yeah, and certainly I don't think I would be advocating, nor would anyone, for rushing through things. I think it's just there's a real absence of information and a real presence of video. And the two things in confluence, I think, have people very, very curious about what happened and also nervous about their own experience flying. I know, once again, and this is the same conversation we had last time, right? Like, it's such a small fraction of the amount of flights that take place. But given the sort of video that we have been confronted with, I think people are nervous.
Understandably, our skies are safe, and our aviation sector itself takes extreme vigilance to ensure that our skies are safe. Remember that when this occurred on Monday, that first responders were on the scene immediately, and that everyone collaborated to ensure that operations at the airport could resume as soon as possible, while ensuring that the investigation began as soon as possible. And I will say that our skies are safe, and they will remain safe because safety is our top priority.
Just one final question on this for you. You mentioned that you had spoken to Secretary Duffy. I'm just wondering if you can characterize how your interactions with him on this have gone, given the sort of acrimony and tension between the White House and Canada right now. What can you tell us about that?
I have spoken with Secretary Duffy twice in the past 2 weeks or so. I will say that our relationship is extremely cordial. I will be traveling to Washington in the coming days to meet with him in person, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate with him in terms of ensuring that we are collaborating as countries, as governments, but also to ensure that our transportation systems are as safe as possible.
Okay, let me switch gears to, speaking of transportation system, in this case, the idea of high-speed rail, the announcement you made alongside the Prime Minister today. Why is your government announcing this now when the Prime Minister is weeks away from not being the Prime Minister?
Vashi, we have been running a procurement process which is open and competitive, and a winning bidder has been selected by the PSPC and Transport Canada officials who are overseeing that process. We are therefore announcing that bidder today, Cadence, the Cadence Consortium, and proceeding with the second phase of this process, which is the co-development phase of $3.9 billion to ensure that we are executing on a project that will deliver $35 billion annually to the Canadian economy once the high-speed rail project is completed. This will cut passenger wait times, and it will cut delays. It will reduce emissions. It will create 51,000 jobs. The economic benefits are clear, and we as a government have been and remain committed to it. That's why we made the announcement today.
But the point is that, with all due respect, Minister, you might not be the government in a couple of months. And even if you remain as Liberals in the government, today Mark Carney was asked, and he seemed to endorse the project to a certain degree, but said that he would have to review it and make sure that it would be, I'm paraphrasing, but effective for Canadians. Your government has been studying this since 2016. Via Rail itself has been studying it since 1984. Why should Canadians have any confidence that this will go forward?
There's a lot in that question, Vashi, large preamble, but let me just say that we're taking a very prudent approach. We're taking a very prudent approach in the co-development stage. $3.9 billion for this stage to do the planning necessary before construction would begin. The contract that the Crown Corporation, Alto, will enter into with the winning bidder, Cadence, will be for the planning of this project into the building phase, where the stations Where is this new dedicated track going to be placed? 1,000 kilometers of it. What form of consultations will be undertaken with the Indigenous communities, with the public at large? In other words, Vashi, we're not throwing money at a project. We are making sure that we are deliberate and we are prudent with taxpayer dollars. Whatever government comes in the coming weeks and months, there will be a path set forward for high-speed rail that again will deliver $35 billion annually to the Canadian economy when completed. That is not a partisan point. That is simply a point about what is good for the economic future of this country, including increased productivity, which you and I have spoken about, and which we need to focus on in Canada. This is going to make sure that workers can get to their destination on time and that they can return home at the end of the day to be with their families. This is good news for Canada, and this is good news for the Canadian economy in the long term.
My understanding is, though, that the co-development phase, the phase of development will last up to 5 years. And then you've got multi-phases of actually constructing it over an even longer period, could be a couple of decades. You and your government have been making the case over the past month that we've got to get big things done here in Canada in order to counter our reliance on the United States. If it takes 8 years to study the prospect, another 5 to develop it, and 2 more decades to build it, is that really getting big things done quickly?
Actually, this is the largest procurement and infrastructure project in Canadian history. We need to make sure we take the time to get it right. And again, the co-development phase is about ensuring that we cross our T's and dot our I's. How are we going to proceed to the building phase? And we will ensure that within this 5 years, we set forward the path for construction, the path for the building of high-speed rail, making sure that that dedicated track of 1,000 kilometers is well planned out before we attribute money to that project. It's going to be staged, it's going to be systematic, and when all is said and done, it is going to add massive economic benefits to the Canadian economy, something we should all look forward to, especially because we do not need to go through Donald Trump to get this built.
Just very quickly, there's a union in the NDP asking whether or not your government will guarantee through the use of public money throughout this process that it's Canadian steel used and Canadian workers solely involved. Will your government guarantee that?
As I said, we chose, or the government officials overseeing this procurement chose the winning bidder just recently, and that contract has to be signed going forward. All efforts are going to be utilized to ensure Canadian products and Canadian workers, of course, in this project. But the decisions relating to these items will be taken by the consortium and by the Crown Corporation as a public-private partnership. We're utilizing this model in order to draw on the expertise and the experience of the consortium members, as well as to ensure a prudent utilization of taxpayer dollars. But yes, we seek to be Canadiana all the way.
But seek to be and ensure you will be are two different things. Are you saying that it's not the government who will decide these things, that it's the Crown Corporation who will independently decide, leaving open the possibility of using steel that doesn't come from this country?
The next few weeks are going to be taken up with the negotiation of the contract between the consortium and the Crown Corporation. Decisions about risk allocation between these parties, decisions about costs during the course of the contract, decisions about timelines and the consultations are all going to be made by those two parties together. This is a public-private partnership, and therefore the decisions will be made once that contract is concluded, going forward to the end of the co-development phase and beyond. So we very much look forward to the results of that negotiation, the contract itself, and then building high-speed rail for Canada, which is very good news for Canadians and the Canadian economy.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Minister, a pleasure as always. I appreciate you making the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.